Our content is intended to be used and must be used for informational purposes only. It is very important to do your own research analysis before making any investment based on your personal circumstances. You should take independent financial advice from a professional in connection with or independently research and verify any information that you find on our website or podcast and wish to rely upon, whether for the purpose of making an investment decision or otherwise.
Let me ask you something, man.
Don't stop. I'm not finished yet.
Do you ever ask
Don't
yourself,
stop. I'm not
when are
finished
they ever
yet.
gonna stop? Do you ever ask yourself, when those bad boys are gonna stop making all that money?
What's up, my future one percenters? This is Marathon Money, brought to you by MarathonMoneyPlus.com. I'm Cam Jones, the prince of the stock market, aka your favorite billionaire's favorite thousandaire, and I'm here with my boy Kenny Coins. What's up, man?
Man, it's been good. It's been good. Market's been down. Inflation rate is 9.1%. Man, it's not looking good. It's not looking good. It's not looking good.
Well, before we talk about that kind of stuff, we got to introduce. We have a guest on the show today. His name is Chris Walsh. What's up, Chris?
How's it going? I've been looking at inflation and stock market 8 times a day too, so put it all down and not look for a couple months.
So that's basically what I'm with you on that one. It's better just to be surprised at the supermarket. Oh, it's up $2 more.
You said be surprised at the supermarket. So, Chris, you want to tell the listeners what you do?
Sure. I'm the CEO and founding editor of MJBiz, which stands for Marijuana Business, and we've been around for almost 12 years. We provide news and analysis and market research and live business events for the cannabis industry across the country and across the globe.
Okay, that's pretty cool, man. So, we talk about, man, we haven't really talked about marijuana stocks or businesses on this podcast for a couple of months because, I had high hopes, or Kenny and I, we had high hopes for, the marijuana business about, 4 or 5 years ago. And it just hasn't took off the way that we thought it would. So where in the cannabis business, what are the biggest growth areas?
Well, I mean, to your point, when you're looking at cannabis stocks, they're a crapshoot. They don't really trade on anything. They don't trade on fundamentals. They don't really mirror the overall market's ups and downs. No one knows what to really make of them. It's still federally illegal. So when you're talking about opportunities in stocks, it's really longer term companies that you think are, if you do your due diligence, right, that you think will rise to the top under kind of a federal legalization or federal reform situation. And they're hard to pick out, but there's companies there that you can look for that have solid fundamentals, that are really growing in a responsible way. They have a strategy for their growth across the country, and they are picking and choosing markets to expand into and developing national brands based on a thesis that you can understand, and not just, there's other companies that are just kind of grabbing wherever they can, trying to get a foothold across the country, and they're hemorrhaging money, and their financials don't look very good because they're going for footprint. Now, some of those might make it, right? And so some of those could be good bets, but we've seen this time and again in a lot of industries that model sometimes fails spectacularly. When investors start saying, okay, when are you going to make a profit?
Mm-hmm.
So on the stock market, that's kind of how I view it. But in the industry in general, what you're seeing is an industry that's maturing. So you have some kind of old school states that legalized, a decade ago and started their medical or recreational marijuana industries: California, Oregon, Colorado, Washington State, and the opportunities are smaller right now, because they're kind of saturated and they're going through the maturation stage, and it's getting harder to compete. Where you see a lot of the opportunities is actually in the eastern part of the country now. A lot of people associate the marijuana industry with the West Coast, where it kind of originated, but Now you have New York, you have New Jersey, you have Connecticut. They're legalizing recreational marijuana, so there's a lot of interest in that region, spanning from cultivation to making infused gummies and chocolates and lozenges, all the way to the retail side and then everything that supports the industry that doesn't touch the plant. Whether it's the vendors, it's the service providers, the taxers, lawyers, you name it. There's a whole ecosystem out there of opportunities.
Right, man.
I got a question.
Go ahead, Kenny.
How easy it is to get into the marijuana business?
It's not. So in the early days, if you wanted, let's choose Colorado, that's where we're based. In Denver, when we started in 2011, there were dispensaries that started with $10,000 or less. They started growing in their homes, and then selling to patients, quote unquote. It's kind of what was it really patients back then before regulations?
Yeah, we ain't gonna get into that right now.
Right. And they were able to open storefronts in kind of dilapidated areas where a lot of businesses didn't want to be because it was marijuana, right? So you could go in these areas of town, and you could open for very, very limited amounts of money and resources. And so you'll read stories from back then of successful companies that grew up with the industry that got started for almost nothing. Now, if you want to do something that touches the plant, so that's grow it, cultivation, if you want to process it into infused products, or if you want to sell it at a retail level, in many states, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not, into the millions, because of the regulations now that each state has put around this industry. And I'd like to just counter that with the other part of the industry is those, as I mentioned earlier, we call them ancillary companies, and they provide services to the industry or to consumers. They don't touch the plant. The barriers there are much lower. So if you're in marketing or you're a finance person or investor, whatever you do, there's a need for cannabis. Barriers are much lower, and there's not all the regulations. There's challenges, but so you can get in if you're not touching the plant a lot easier. So it depends really where you want to play.
Basically, if you
But long term, my bad, Cam.
I was just saying, basically, if you just want to throw money at it and then just wait, it's easy to do something like that.
Yeah, but long term, touching the plant is where the money's at.
Well, it is a lot of it, but like we're an ancillary company, and we just sold to a mainstream events and events company that does business events, and it was a high dollar figure, and they came in, they're publicly traded, so you can make a lot of money on the ancillary side, but on the plant touching side, there are immense challenges. It's very difficult to get involved, but yeah, that's where the ultimate opportunity is. If you become the McDonald's or the Starbucks or the Coca-Cola or the Amazon, use any analogy you want of cannabis, there's going to be billionaires created for sure.
The one thing that I'm struggling to understand is why it's taking so long to become just in general legalized, because I see a lot of states that's hurting for tax revenue, and this is just the easy, you could get a lot of tax money from this. So instead of raising taxes and all these levies and things like that, why wouldn't they just legalize marijuana?
Yeah, I mean, you can look at it from two different sides, and you can say, wow, this is taking forever, right? And when you're in the industry, it feels that way. Every year in cannabis feels like, we call it pot years. The year in cannabis is like 5 years in any other industry. It's so crazy. It changes all the time. It moves at a breakneck pace. So if you're in it, 10 years does feel like 40, 50. But if you look historically and zoom out, the amount of change we've seen around marijuana in a decade is immense. Like, think of when you grew up, right? And marijuana, I mean, you would go to jail for years, decades. It was a serious business to get into underground, and you could get in big trouble. And so now you have, well over half the country is legalized medical. 19 states have legalized recreational. You have big companies getting in and big investors. And so I think it has moved quickly, but the reason it hasn't moved more quickly is because there's a lot of holdouts. There's a lot of stigma around the plant still that is held over, from decades of misinformation and demonizing it. And so it's taking a long time to get past that for some people. And where you see that is particularly in red states, and this isn't a political comment, but it's true. Some of the red states have held out, on medical and recreational. That's starting to change significantly, but those kind of old conservative attitudes have dominated for a very long time when it comes to marijuana. And so we're getting there. We still got a long way to go when you think this industry generates 25 to 30 billion dollars in retail sales in the US every year. The legalized, state legalized, regulated industry. That's how much it generates, but it's still federally illegal. Makes no sense.
What's the next states that you think will legalize?
That's a really good question. I mean, there's a handful that could legalize this year, and I'm hesitant to give out specifics because it can always change. There's some states in the South where we'll likely see some medical legalization, and a couple states on the recreational side. These will be smaller states, smaller markets, and I think the big prize is still left when you look at opportunities. Is Florida legalizing recreational? Massive market. They have medical now. It's dominated by 24 companies. So hopefully, if and when they legalize, that'll be a massive market, and they'll open it up to more people to get involved. Texas has a very limited CBD. That's the part of cannabis that doesn't get you high. You've probably seen it all over the place at airports and 7-Elevens. It's not really a medical marijuana program. It's moving in that direction. But if they loosen that up, if they legalize recreational, that's a huge new market. So we have some big markets out there on the horizon, but we've hit a lot of them already, especially when you get New York and New Jersey legalizing recreational. And now, as I mentioned, it's starting to move into those red states, like South Dakota, and Oklahoma has the largest medical cannabis industry by sales, which is crazy. Red state, it opposed it, and then it passed it, and it's like a Wild West. You can get in for cheap there, but you get in and the competition's tough, and they're not really enforcing the regulations. So you're seeing a change, and I think you'll just see every year we just see more states legalize and more states, and that's why we're at the vast majority, almost 40 have legalized medical.
How does technology and innovation play a part in this industry? Like I look at someone like a Weed Maps, right? And I see, where do they stand in an industry like this?
Yeah, I think that what you've had is this industry has been buffered from a lot of the competitive threats that are out there because mainstream companies, people with a lot of deep expertise in certain areas, have been hesitant to get involved because it's federally illegal. So you've had this industry evolve in a weird, strange, unique way, which has been great because a lot of people have found business opportunities that wouldn't have otherwise been able to get in. So you don't have the Amazons and the Googles in it now. So when you talk about technology, you had people that were grew up around the plant, loved to smoke. They said, hey, I got a business opportunity, right? And they might have said, I know technology. I'm going to list all the dispensaries in a state online, like a Yelp, and you can do reviews, and that's kind of what Weed Maps did, right? But you didn't have Yelp coming in. You didn't have a TripAdvisor, or whoever you want to compare it to. So what you're seeing now is that more experienced professionals from the outside, from the mainstream, are coming in, and they're joining cannabis companies. They're starting them, and they're giving their expertise and helping build new models. So innovation in general has been relatively slow going. There's been some great innovation along the way, but it's been kind of holstered by the federal situation and the barriers of entry of people who just don't want to be associated with it. Again, that's changing very quickly.
I got a question also about Philip Morris had dominated the tobacco market for like decades. They're buying acres and acres, hundreds of acres, to literally get into the marijuana business. I feel like a company like that will not only they will dominate, but kind of will destroy it. Because now with so many marijuana, you can lace it with different things now. You can infuse it with so many different things. do you feel like in the future some of those things will end up being poisonous instead of just the plant?
I mean, the industry's had an interesting history with that because there hadn't been testing regulations for years, right? States just weren't paying attention, and so you didn't know what was going into it, and there were issues with that. And even now, the testing side is all over the board. So one lab might give some reading, and another might give a completely different reading. There's been recalls because of issues. There's no federal regulations on it, right? So there's no federal standards for even how you test or what you test for. So every state's completely different. And then the labs are completely different because there's no standardization there either. So they're using different methodologies, right? So that's a huge thing the industry's been working towards. To your question, Kenny, there's mixed feelings, and a lot of them are negative about these big companies that are gearing up. As you said, we know these big companies are gearing up. We've been seeing it for years. Name your industry, and they're gearing up: alcohol, tobacco, consumer, CPG, technology. All of them are waiting till they can feel comfortable with the federal situation to get involved. So there's a lot of fear that you'll have, say, a big tobacco company come in and use a bunch of chemicals in an industry and a consumer base that typically is more for kind of organic and not mass-produced stuff. And we'll have to see where that goes. So it's not, legalization will open the door to that, right? So you'll talk to many people in the industry who say, I don't even want legalization because we're growing now how we want to, or roughly how we want to, without people like the big tobacco companies or the big alcohol companies coming in. Now they're starting to. Tobacco companies have made investments. They're starting to get involved. Alcohol companies, Constellation Brands is one of the largest liquor distributors in the world. And it made a big bet in Canada on a cannabis company. It hasn't gone very well, but all these companies are circling, right? And are going to get involved at some point. And the only thing I'll say to that really quickly, though, is it's not just because of Philip Morris has this previous success that they are guaranteed to dominate this industry. What we've seen is that companies and individuals come in. It's a completely different industry in how it works. And your old playbook that you use to make you successful doesn't work in this one. A lot of hubris comes in, and big companies fail. They have failed. Doesn't mean they will, or always will, or all of them have. But if you're looking at investment opportunities, you're like, I'm going to bet on this big alcohol or tobacco company because they're going to dominate this. You got to be careful because it's a fragmented industry. Every state does it differently. You don't know the lingo. You don't know how they do the business here. And you can fall flat on your face.
That part I understand. I completely agree with you that a big company moving into a different industry is not going to guarantee 100%, maybe not even 50%. But my thing is that when big companies step in, is that their goal is to not only mass produce but make it as addictive as possible. You know what I mean? And that, like, I believe at one point tobacco wasn't that addictive. You know what I mean? I think over time is to make more money, mass produce it. They made it more addictive. And it might take 10 or 15 more years, but you get bigger companies, they're trying to push out more and more product, and they're trying to get more and more consumers, and they're trying to get more and more new people to start smoking marijuana. That's where I feel like when you federally legalize it, that's one of the biggest problems you run into. And because you're going to try to push as many people to start picking up this new wave of relaxment.
I don't know if it's new though. Is it really new?
No, it's not it's not new, but like legal way.
Okay.
A new legal way of doing something. And that's my biggest worry, because for me as a investor, I'd rather take a bet on the small guy, because if I put 2-3 grand on the small guy, my investment is going to turn into, in a couple years, hopefully $1 million. That's like, because you're starting from the smallest. They're probably the only people in that space. Philip Morris is already big, so all their goal is to try to get 3 times bigger. So the way I feel is, though, for them to do that, they're going to find a way to make it more addictive, and that will cause another issue, and then the stigma will come back.
I mean, it absolutely could. I mean, it's a kind of a uncharted waters we're going into. We know how big companies, when they come in industries, what happens, right? The smaller people get pushed out. There's mass consolidation. To your point, it doesn't always lead to the best situation for consumers, and they do employ all their power and money to get you to click, to spend, to use as much as possible, and to use all that data and methodologies, right? So I totally get that concern. I'm hoping that the industry develops more like the craft beer industry or the beer industry in general, where it wouldn't take the same timeline, but for a while there was only a couple beers you could really get, right? A lot of crappy beers. And then you have these craft breweries, which are everywhere now, right? And they spread around the country, and they've eaten into the share. Like in the Denver area, there's, instead of a neighborhood liquor store or bar, there's a brewery, and so they've really cut into that because consumers want that. And cannabis is very similar. There will be a market for kind of that mass produced side of it, but there's going to be a huge market that doesn't want that at all, and they're going to support the smaller players, the smaller brands, the craft mentality. And I really think that that's what will happen. You will see a bifurcation of the market. Now, which percentage goes which way, I don't know. But I don't see a huge, overwhelming appetite for mass-produced cannabis. Now, people say it will become a commodity, the actual cultivation of it in the plant. But when you're putting that into drinks, when you're making that into infused products, that adds a whole new dimension to it.
I was just gonna ask you about drinks, but before I do that, man, I just gotta say, I don't agree with Kenny here about when he talks about the big. Okay, I agree with him when he talks about the big companies, and they try to make it more addictive, and their goal is to get bigger. But see, me, I don't smoke and I don't drink. My primary thing is I want to invest in it. So if I'm, as an investor, I want to make money. So of course, when I invest, I want the company to be thinking, man, I want to grow 3 times, and whatever they got to do that, to me, it's fine with me. I'm not the one using it. You know what I'm saying? Does that make me?
I'm with you on that. I'm still buying the stock. I'm just saying that. Don't get twisted. I'm still buying the stock. But what I'm trying to say is that a lot of the times you'll notice is like over time those small players won't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. Where like you might have a small mom and pop shop where you go and you got some good weed, good marijuana. Now because they can't pay the regulation fees, they can't pay all these new laws. Now they're gone because what happens is with those bigger companies, what ends up happening is they do so much towing the line, they come up with new laws. Laws only get formed when you tow that line so many times.
Yeah, they have the lobbying money to shape the regulations. We're seeing that play out in the industry where some of the big companies are affecting the regulations to say, hey, instead of having 200 licenses for retail stores, why don't you just approve 20? And then we're going to get 5 of them or 10 of them and have a massive control of the market. You're seeing that play out, absolutely. So you have a great point. One of the things, though, is there's a huge, 2 things. One is those small players will also get acquired. So, right, if you choose the good ones, as the big ones come in, you've got an investment return there with a great multiple potentially. And we're seeing that already. There's chain stores developing over the last 4 or 5 years in many markets that are kind of, some have 20, 30 locations in a state. And to do that, a lot of times they've acquired some of the smaller players. In some cases, they pushed them out too, of course. You're seeing brands now develop on the infused product side that are now in multiple states through licensing deals. You can't ship marijuana across state lines, so they've come up with ways to extend their brands nationally. If one of those companies, we just had one called Wana that's out of Colorado, very well-known infused products brand, makes gummies, marijuana infused gummies, and they were just bought at a massive multiple by a Canadian company. And so that's another avenue here. And the other thing I'd say, though, is the state regulations also make it very difficult, for a company to come in and just dominate, because, as I mentioned, you can't ship across state lines, right? So there's no central distribution or production points. So Philip Morris or whoever relies on, efficiencies and economies of scale. Well, guess what? You have to have a facility in every state, and it's got different regulations, and some of them have ownership clauses and rules. So it's going to be very hard, at least as currently constructed, for a big company to come in. And even if the federal government said, cannabis can be legalized according to state rules, essentially it's legal, every state has a different way it's doing it. So that would take a long time to play out. And lastly, I'll say that there's also a huge social equity push in the industry, which was long overdue. One of the big criticisms of the cannabis industry is that it's people like me in it, right? I wasn't affected by the war on drugs as much as others. And so, now if it costs hundreds of thousands or millions, you're excluding a lot of people from getting in. And I'm not saying I have that much money. I'm just saying there's a lot of white middle-aged males in it, right? And so there's a big push by states to make sure that the people most affected by the war on drugs, that were going to jail over way higher proportions for cannabis possession, have an opportunity now. So you have states in like California, which have created social equity licenses, and they will even give you extra points, or however you want to describe it, if you were convicted in the past. It's not a negative mark. If you're trying to get a license, it's actually a positive, because they're trying to bring people into the industry. So there's also going to be opportunities there that the big companies can't touch, and that are there for investment, whether it's an angel investment or whether it's eventually is a stock.
Man, I'm glad that you mentioned that. Well, I guess I'm not really that glad, because it took away a little bit of the sting of my question. But I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you why. I was going to ask you, why do you think not that many black people are in the space? But you kind of answered the question. The effect of war on drugs is it sets people back a little bit. Yeah, and I know here, I'm in Ohio. Kenny is in New York. And in Ohio, I don't think they legalized recreation yet, but they did medical.
Yep.
And I know they're gearing up for recreation. Something had passed or out here. It's not fully legal yet, but it will be in the near future. And I know that they are taking applications for licenses, but they reserve X amount for only minorities, and when I looked into it, man, it cost you just like, $15,000 just to look at the paperwork, It's like
And again, that's been the evolution, is that even to get a pinky toe in the game, to see if you could even qualify and make a go at it and get a license, it costs a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
So this whole social equity movement, there will not be a state. This is my prediction. There will not be a state going forward that legalizes without a social equity component. It has been a part of almost every new state in the last 2 years. It was not even in the discussion 5 years ago. We've been doing surveys on diversity and women and minority ownership for several years. This wasn't a big discussion 5 or 6 years ago. Now it is one of the top discussions. And there's controversy around it, right? And every state's trying it differently. It's good that the industry is embracing it. Legislators are embracing it. There's no clear model that's going to work for everyone, or that's going to have the intended purposes. It's all an experiment right now, but it is baked into the industry now. And to your point, you still need a lot of money in a lot of cases. And if you get some help by getting a social equity license or applying for that, it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's still expensive, but you do have people with capital that want to partner. For whether you like their reasoning or not, but sometimes that's their way in the door, and you're the majority owner, but they're maybe controlling 30-40%, and they want in a hot market, and they're teaming up with someone who could apply for social equity one. We're seeing a lot of that, and then again, controversy too. Some of these programs aren't working the way they were intended, but I do think these efforts will help diversify the industry and open the door for more people to get involved and find the money that they need now to start a business in this industry, because it's a lot more than it used to be.
Man, we coming up here on our 30-minute
I
mark.
got I
But
got one more
yeah,
question, man.
I had
What
one more too,
stocks?
man. We're gonna have to go over.
Wait,
We're
what
gonna have
stock?
to...
What's what stocks do you know, like marijuana stocks right now, in your opinion, that 5 years from now, 3 to 5 years from now, when if things go the right way, that you see can be like potentially dominating the market?
Now, this is a question I cannot answer because we run a media company too, and
Yeah.
we are objective and we don't give our opinions on specific companies. Is what I can tell you is which I know is a big bummer. I know I get asked this all the time.
Is it?
Family, they're like, "Come on, tell me who to get here." Like, where should I throw it? I'm like, "Can't tell you." But again, it goes back to how we started. I think it's like any other investment. You got to understand the industry at least basically, and what the company's doing. And so, where you're finding the biggest opportunities are what we call MSOs. They're multi-state operators. These are companies that have found a way to win licenses and operate dispensaries, cultivation facilities, infused product brands in multiple states. It could be 4 states. Some are up to 15 states. As these big national companies develop, they've got to win licenses in every state. They can do it through acquisitions, partnerships, or winning them on their own. But these are where people are placing their bets. Which ones rise to the top? I can't tell you. I don't know. But you have to figure out where you think the industry is going, and does this company seem to grasp what it needs to get there? And so some of these publicly traded companies, these MSOs, again, they're just throwing darts at a map and saying, we're going to this state and this state and this state. Maybe that'll pay off.
Right.
Others have a very fine strategy.
That's my problem. Because even if you get a company with a good foundation, at the end of the day, because it's not federally legal, you don't know the repercussion or the consequences, good or bad, when it does get federally legal. Because you could think it go left and then get federally legal, it goes right. You know what I mean? So it's that's the reason why I asked the question, because it's still the Wild West. It's just a little bit more controlled, but it's not as controlled as like the car industry or the tobacco industry or the liquor industry. It's not as controlled as that. So it's still a company that could be dominating now don't mean that they're going to be dominating in 10 years or 5.
And there's funds out there, right? There's basically index funds for cannabis, and maybe you spread out your risk and go for something that's across the industry. If you believe in the future of the industry, and you think when legalization happens, it won't be, again, every state it's legal, says the federal government. It will be a bank change to the banking situation. The cannabis companies can't use traditional banks right now in many cases. That would be a huge market mover. A change to the tax code. They can't take common business deductions. That would be a huge market mover. And then anything that said states can decide on their own under these circumstances, it's no longer completely illegal. Any of these would move the market as a whole up, right? But without one of those catalysts, it's going to be volatile. It's going to go up and down. You're going to be barfing one day when you look at it, and then jumping out of your chair the next because it's up, and it won't make any sense. Yeah. That's how the industry is likely going to move until something bigger happens, or individual companies too.
I know we got you on here a little longer than 30 minutes, but my last question is where in your opinion is the hottest market right now? Not really like where they're making the most money or whatever, but like you see everyone going that when they talk about it, they like want to go here to this state or whatever to do this.
New York.
New York. I thought you was gonna say Vegas.
No, Nevada's had it for a couple years now, and it's had some opportunities, but New York is the big market right now. Population size, influence, opening the door to recreational marijuana there is huge. So, we don't.
You can sell it. You can sell on the street of 42nd, Times Square. There's people on the corner selling it. Literally have their own little stand, selling out their car, pushing out the window.
And I will tell you that while there's a lot of hype in New York and there is a lot of potential, that is the danger. and we saw that in California because if you don't
Yeah.
get that under control, then the companies that pay all the money for regulations and to abide by all the regulations aren't going to be able to compete against the illicit market.
Mm-hmm.
So New York has like a hands-off approach now. I was just there too, and I was like, wow, they don't care anymore.
No, New York don't care. Like it's everywhere. New York don't care. Like I seen a guy. He has his van. He took a sheet of paper, uh, $10 for an ounce, and just put it on his window. That's it. That's his whole store. It's in his van. But like New York don't care. Cops ride by all day, don't say nothing. It's pretty much like the wild wild west here. That's it.
Yeah.
You can literally have it in a backpack and walk around and sell it, and nothing will happen to you. Now, a year ago, yeah, you'll get stopped. You'll get arrested, but now nobody cares.
Yeah. And if that doesn't change, then the legit companies that spring up are going to have a very difficult time. But that's where all the hype is now. Almost everyone is looking for some type of play in New York right now.
So, it was good having you, Chris. Tell the listeners where they can find you on social media.
Yeah, it's MJBiz.com is our website, and I think through there we have our big conference, MJBiz Con, in Vegas coming up in November. We get 35,000 plus business people from the industry, from outside. We have 1,400 exhibitors. It's crazy. No product on the show floor. This is it's not allowed, but this is a professional business conference for the industry.
So me and Kenny can go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I guess we'll let you in.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Hey, you can find me anywhere at Camboni11, CAMBONI11 on StockTwits, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat. You can also find me on the Trader Champ app. Make sure you download that. And where can they find you, Kenny?
Kenny Collin 23 on Instagram, Kendrick Collin 2 N's in the middle on Twitter. Thank you guys for listening, and peace.
Peace, man. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah,
Chris,
thanks for having me on.
appreciate it.
Yeah.